Hello everyone, and welcome back to Autonomia, the show where we bring ideas from the libertarian left to everyday people, and foster conversation on what we believe in hopes of proving that we all have far more in common than we are trained to believe. My name is Hayward, and I am your host. As always, our intro and outro music come from a song called A Bigger Cage is Still a Prison by System Failure. If you'd like to look up this song, the band spells System, C-I-S-T-E-M, for political reasons.
There's nothing I want more than to sleep under the night sky. Hear the animals as they go about their lives. Feel the fire warm my body, feel the mud under my toes. But tonight this cell keeps me enclosed.
Hello everyone, and thank you so much for tuning in. The industrial hell that you hear in the background is because we're in downtown New London right now at our monthly aid giveaway. You just heard the lovely, beautifully maintained Amtrak train screech by. It's doing quite well, a lot of investment in it, getting people to and from places very quickly, very efficiently, and most critically, very affordably. That's why...
I will say, not very safely. There are quite a few Amtrak accidents on the record.
Yeah,
Many derailments, mostly in Pennsylvania for some reason.
And I'm paid entirely too much to go on Amtrak less than 10 times in my entire life. And that banging you hear in the background is sort of the neo-imperialist effort of the of the Connecticut government trying to make their port bigger, and in so doing make some kind of something happen, but who knows what'll happen and when.
It will kill a lot of fish, I'm sure.
It will kill a lot of fish if it hasn't already. I wonder how many horseshoe crabs are cast into the bottom of the foundation that will be revealed 10,000 years from now in architectural digs. All of the impressions of the sea life they just dumped concrete on top of. The voice you heard in the background, as you might be aware, is our good friend Doc, who we've managed to find yet again. And we were talking about quite a few things. Space, why we like space, why we hate space, the dynamics of potential future space colonization, and why colonization is a bit of a dirty word.
Why you should ideally not have children in space?
Why you should ideally not have children in space, because the intergenerational ethical complications of having children in zero G get really sticky.
Speaking of sticky, I was also focusing on the actual physiological problems with having childbirth go on in less than Earth gravity.
Yeah.
Because we've been giving birth to children, we being human beings, since always, and we don't really know how to do it on Mars. So
yeah, I mean, we don't even know how those different gravitational influences will play out, how well we can shield for radiation during gestation. And it's a whole complicated mess, and maybe someday that will be an episode with less horrible hammering in the background. But Doc and I started talking about our shared experience in the ISO, also known as the International Socialist Organization.
Can I just butt in right away? The ISO, as it existed, was international only in the sense that it had a sister organization in the UK. So it was the United States and the United Kingdom. I'm not sure how international such an organization can be said to be.
Well, you got to punch above your weight when it comes to names. You call yourself international, you call yourself democratic maybe, People's Republic maybe.
Yeah.
Always punch above your weight with your names. Always seem bigger than you are. And so this is actually part of how Doc and I met. We initially met at a nonviolent direct action training that we both found a little bit coming up short in their philosophy of things, but that's fine.
Yeah, they were just more polite about it at the time than I was.
I was certainly more polite about it. At the time, had just come back from living overseas in autonomous zones, and I said, your understandings of activism and politics are a little bit different than mine, but I'm very happy to meet you nice people and find a future collaboration. Their organization since completely disappeared and has had no lasting impact on our society at large. And speaking of no lasting impact on our society at large, we went to a meeting at the ISO a little bit later because Doc at that point had met some of the local leftists in our scene.
Yeah, so at the time, I had just gone through the 2016 Democratic election, and I didn't really know where my philosophy and politics and such were going to end up. I just knew I didn't really like the way things were. So I literally went up to college one day and picked up a book called Che Guevara Speaks, which was a little, like 200-page paperback. And then I just went on Facebook and looked up the word socialist and found the ISO, which I admit at the time, since I didn't know any better, sounded very impressive. I went to a meeting in the back room of a local bar. I expected to be patted down and asked a bunch of intrusive background questions, none of which happened. And I ended up meeting with like 3 people that day, not including Hayward, whom I met later.
Yeah, so a little bit later, I ended up coming into this shortly after we first met, and so I met these people in the bar as well, and it was a little bit of distance between me and those other people ideologically. The ISO was sort of a more broadly Trotskyist sort of orientation, and I have identified as an anarchist for quite some time, so we share certain analyses but come to maybe different conclusions about things. But this was an openly leftist dialogue locally that I found very interesting. And as Doc moved politically as well, him and I had this tendency to disrupt the meetings, politely, of course, but just, sort of hashing out our disagreements, because for us, this was an opportunity to talk about things in a leftist way openly. And for the ISO, it was to be a book club. And the disruption of that book club to us, or to them, was very problematic.
Yeah, at the time I was moving more politically in a Maoist direction. As you can imagine, if there's one thing Maoists and anarchists both love, it's disrupting other people's meetings.
Absolutely.
Preferably as loudly and obnoxiously as possible. So I was rather fond of like yelling and banging on the table and explaining to the actual ISO members why they were wrong.
Yeah, absolutely. I have a generally more gentle way of approaching disagreements, but I was approached by the head of this organization a few days after we had our initial meeting saying like, hey, are you interested in maybe joining up? And I said, well, I'm not really in your political camp ideologically speaking. He says, oh, well, so you're more like ultra left? I'm like, well, I'm actually an anarchist. And he's like, oh, okay. And he just sort of, a distance grew at that point, and it seemed like we were gradually less and less welcome because we were challenging their ideological direction, because they were sort of more into educating and maybe you could say baptizing new Trotskyists rather than actually doing something. An issue at the time was the Crystal Avenue apartments, and that banging you hear in the background is sort of where they used to be, and people were living there at the time. Very bad mold, very dangerous place, and we were thinking, how can we empower these people? How can we do something about it? And the response was, we have to go up to the universities and table and sell newspapers. And so Doc and I were a little disappointed by that, and that started this gradual rift happening.
Yeah, so we were like, we had a disagreement with the branch leadership. Their leadership and their membership were 2 guys combined, and the one guy's brother, so maybe 3 people. But we were in a situation where we're like, there are actual needs in our community that we'd like to go meet if possible. And then from that, sort of build a more like politically conscious project if we're able to. And if not, we'll just have met the needs in our community and made the place objectively better. Like doing shit was more of a priority for both of us than reading books endlessly. Which, don't get me wrong, I love reading books, but I'd rather not be hanging out with a bunch of insufferable nerds while I'm doing that.
Yeah, I mean, Fred Hampton said something to the effect of, theory is all good, but without practice, it's not worth shit.
Yeah,
and it's true. And so when I spoke to this guy privately, I was saying, hey, when are we going to do something? And he said, well, we got to sharpen our theory more so we can more appropriately address, the situation when the revolutionary moment comes. And I'm more of the perspective, having lived off of the results of other people's revolutions, saying the time for resistance and revolution is always, or at least pushing in that direction. And insulating yourselves in the back room of a bar talking about books of 100 years ago is not necessarily going to move you in that direction, especially if you don't have a really outward-facing, community-oriented organization. And so this just continued butting heads back and forth, and eventually we got to a point where we started to talk about how Doc and I had formed the New London Mutual Aid Collective together, and we're trying to, announce it to these folks, not necessarily saying you should do this, but just saying, hey, we're doing this new project. And we were told in no uncertain terms that there was a certain lacking of revolutionary potential with the pores.
Yeah, the exact words I remember our branch leadership saying was to the effect that, oh, well, the homeless and the poor are just lacking in revolutionary consciousness because they're too busy struggling to survive. So, in other words, the people who are most victimized by capitalism in the state are the people least able to oppose capitalism in the state, as opposed to fairly well-off nerds in the back room of a bar. So
yeah, and you as a former Maoist might be able to answer a question for me. Who was the driving force, collectively behind Mao's revolution succeeding? Was it the masses?
It was the masses.
The masses.
It was the minority working class in China leading the vast peasant majority.
Yeah.
And allying the two together ended up establishing the People's Republic of China, which, Maoists have different thoughts as far as what China looks like now versus what it looked like back then.
Like before they massacred their labor movement?
Before they massacred their labor movement, before they set up what the Maoist folks are fond of calling capitalist roaders like Deng Xiaoping and having stock exchanges in Shanghai and that kind of thing.
Yeah, liberalizing their economy.
Yeah.
But so regardless of how you might feel about the PRC, you have an example of a revolution taking power and creating something new. And that is, of course, the first step to creating a new society. And it involved an alliance between common people and what you might call revolutionary thought leaders. And you can have both of those two groups, but if they're not talking to each other, you're just talking to your friends in a bar.
Yeah.
Like, some people do.
I'm not going to go into details on this for obvious reasons, simply in the interest of both of our safety. But Hayward and I have also done our share of anti-fascist work. And one time we had to travel away from the area to go do anti-fascist work because they were fascists. So we traveled out of town, and we were letting the ISO folks know what was going on and where we were going. And we were told, oh, you can't go there, you can't do that. We have to wait for the other ISO branch that was where we were going to see if they're going to do anything. Perhaps they'll set up a newspaper table or something like that. We're like, no, we're gonna go fuck shit up. That's what we're gonna go do. And so they were like, well, nobody's, and then he tried gaslighting us. He says, oh, well, nobody's trying to tell you not to go. We're just saying that you should wait until we hear back before you go. And we said, no, fuck that, we'll go anyway, we'll let you know how it goes.
Yeah, one of the things that I tried to make clear is, we consider ourselves allies of you. We are friends, we are comrades, but we are not in the same organization, and we are independent, autonomous people. Me at this point being an open anarchist is saying, I have friends in a community that are being put in danger by forces of creeping authoritarianism, and I'm going to put my body in the way of that because that's what I believe is appropriate to do. When your community is in danger, it is incumbent upon those that see that danger, if they have the privilege to do so, to do that work. And so, to me, I have no interest in waiting for the opinions of some hierarchical organization somewhere on whether or not I can act.
Can I just say, too, as someone who served as a street medic since roughly 2017, both for the New London Mutual Aid Collective and at protests across our state and even outside of our state on occasion, I can only imagine what a horrible nightmare a street medic organization run by the ISO would have been. I suppose even though they were criticizing them for having done very little meaningfully, at least they didn't actively try to make things worse. I can only imagine what an ISO street medic collective would have been like.
Can we administer the Narcan? We haven't reached quorum yet.
No. We got to hold a meeting around this person as they're choking their life out on the ground in front of us.
Do we have enough people for a vote?
Let's check this book from Russia from 1922 and see what it says about administering naloxone.
That doesn't mention naloxone.
There's nothing we can do then. I guess. Sorry, pal. I guess you just die.
Can't deviate from the orthodoxy.
Nope.
And to a certain extent, we're kidding here, but this is where the New London Mutual Aid Collective comes from, is sort of a frustration with the lack of action by local leftist groups in the area to actually do something, to reach out in the community and make leftism not only a theoretical thing, but an actual practical thing. And so when we first announced it, we were also told, well, we're not going to do that. And I was saying, no, we're not asking permission. And Doc said the same thing. We're telling you what we're doing, and if you want to come hang out with us, go for it. If not, whatever, do your thing. We're just letting you know this project that we're doing independently of you.
There was a deep misunderstanding at this meeting where we were on the agenda. We explained what we were doing. We explained how we were going to do it. And this is like 2 weeks out, I think, from our first free store or something like that.
Yeah.
And we're like, this is what we're doing. You can help or not, but we're doing it. And he was like, oh, you can't do that. You don't have permission. It's not ISO policy. And it was weird because neither of us were ever considered for membership ever until we wanted to do something. And then even though we weren't members, we were suddenly not allowed to do something, which was interesting.
Yeah, so my understanding of the relationship up until this sort of escalating moment of tension was that we were comrades who, had different perspectives, but we were talking to each other because there were less than half a dozen of us, normally speaking, from week to week, having this conversation. So, the anarchist scene in New London was very small as well, but we were all people that had, a broadly similar analysis, trying to talk things out. And then, from our perspective, then go do things based on, some of those conversations. Maybe we share some ideas and maybe those prompt us to have different approaches as well. But for us, it was sort of a discussion situation that then leads to doing something. And eventually this discrepancy sort of led to what we playfully call the ISO purge. And so Doc's exchange was a lot longer than mine because, I don't know, I tend to be a little more brief on things. But the head called me. I was in my bedroom at the time. I had recently woken up, and he said, hey, we're gonna close the meetings and have it be members only. And I was not at all bothered by this because the New London Mutual Aid Collective at this point was getting a lot of local notoriety. And I said,
we got busy. We were doing stuff.
Right.
We're being cool. I don't know what you nerds are up to.
And so I said, hey, this is your organization. You're the chapter leader. It's your organization. Run it however you want. I'm not going to impose myself on your thing. If you don't want me there, right, I can go do other stuff. That's fine. And he's like, well, thank you for being so mature about this and so understanding. I thought we were going to fight a whole bunch. And I'm like, dude, I'm not going to fight to be in an organization that doesn't want me there, especially if you're not doing anything. And so Doc's interaction was a little bit different because Doc has more of a trollish personality.
Oh, I am 100% a troll. I have no fucking problem saying that at all. So the branch head calls me. I'm living with Nolmac's lawyer, who was my roommate at the time. And it's probably about 9, 10 o'clock in the morning. It's my day off, which I was working 3 to 11 at the psych unit and going to school at the time. So my day off, if I was going to have this conversation at 9 o'clock in the morning on my only day off, I was going to milk it for all it was worth. So he calls me, and he very calmly and very boss from Office, like, I don't know how to describe our branch head's voice other than the manager from the movie Office Space. So he calls me, he goes, hey, just want you to know that we're moving the ISO in a different direction. Now, I know corporate speak when I hear it because I've worked jobs for more than 5 minutes. So whenever anyone tells you that they're moving in a new direction, that's you're getting fired. That's what that means. So we're moving the ISO in a new direction, and we're moving our meetings to members only. So I don't want it to be personal, but I'm like, oh, I 100% understand what's going on. And because this person knew me fine. I don't know why he approached this like this. If I'm being calm and understanding, it's a trap. So he says to me, well, I'm so glad you understand what's going on. And I told him, I 100% understand what's going on. You're politically breaking up with me. I 100%. And I could hear over the phone the absolute just rage he was trying to suppress. He goes, no, I'm not breaking up with you. It's just we're moving in different directions. I said, I know it's not you, it's me. I understand that I've had this conversation before, And the more I was calm and understanding about our political breakup, the angrier this person got. And he didn't speak to me for a good long time after that. So
yeah, and this is sort of strange to us because we have always had more of a pan-leftist orientation where folks come at us from wherever they are and go from there. I mean, at the time of the New London Mutual Aid Collective's founding, Doc was still more of a Maoist at the time. And so, this approach for us has been just a little bit different. And so when we see an organization that at the time, shortly before we were purged, the head of the organization was saying, just 2 years ago, we were just 2 guys in a bar, and now look at us. And Doc and I were both thinking, yeah, now we're 5 guys in a bar. And so
at one point they were 3 guys in a bar. 3 guys and the guy's girlfriend at the time in a bar.
And so after that we became, or they became again, 2 guys in a bar. And so in this time they never seemed to break through to the public in any significant way. During which time we got in the newspaper at least half a dozen times.
We got invited to an Elks Club meeting exactly once, and we were not invited again. But we did go.
It wasn't the Elks; it was the Kiwanis Club.
The Kiwanis Club.
So we got invited to the Kiwanis Club. I was on TV talking about our Fort Trumbull Memorial Orchard, and this is a project.
Still there.
It's still there 3 years later. This is a project where we openly seized several acres of abandoned land owned by a gentrifying developer and planted a community orchard on it. In open defiance of the law, we have the Autonomous Community Assistance Bureau, or also known as ACAB, where we build micro houses for folks that need houses to hide, and that operates outside of the law, but it's a harm reduction method that allows people to have homes. We have a street medic team that does a lot of fantastic work out there, literally demonstrating our politics in the real world to other people.
Yeah, our team is current. It went from just me to 2 of us to 3 of us to, at this point, 4 of us, all different backgrounds. We have my partner who trained me in herbal medicine for a good long time, and they're still a vital part of the team.
Absolutely.
Myself, I have a background in basic nursing, but I'm switching over to pharmacy now. My other partner is a EMT basic and a paramedic student, and our 4th member is a veterinary technician by training.
And so this is a situation where in a very short amount of time, our group grew because we were actually doing things. We were actually demonstrating our politics. And in this time, not only did we do all of these projects, but we also got a lot of local media recognition. We got in the newspaper quite a few times. We've been on TV about this. I've spoken to national level radio. I've spoken to national level podcasts about these projects, and we've broadened the tactics that we have pioneered in our area, and they've been applied in other places. So we've tried to make our reach much more significant, and in a very short time. Doc, you might know better than I do. How long has the ISO been around?
They were around since the 70s.
I was going to say, I think it was the 70s, during which time they more or less just stayed a book club, and in a very short amount of time, because we exemplified our politics through action. We went out and did things, and that actually got stuff done. And so, not only do we do all this direct stuff, but also more on my end of the things, because I don't always have the time to be in New London doing the work. I do a lot of remote stuff. So I do political outreach to folks that are on the right. And I've spoken at length about this in the podcast multiple times. And so we have people that would have wanted to shoot us a couple years ago now thinking we're great.
Yeah, and you and I went to the same rally where Marjorie Taylor Greene was in Connecticut, and I was on duty with the crowd protesting outside because I'm a street medic. While you were doing your outreach thing, and apparently moderately successful from what you told me, I was getting spat on and had very explicit death threats, including one guy, because my dad used to live in the town where Marjorie Taylor Greene's rally was held. So one guy got up in my face when I had my street medic cowl on, and I had my med kit and my trauma kit and tourniquet, all my gear. And he made a very explicit, violent death threat. So I lowered my mask, and I told him I knew where he was. And then he realized I was my dad's son, and I had lived that my dad had lived 3 doors down from him, and he fucked right off.
And I definitely support you having played that role in that protest, because it's important for medical staff to be on hand. And this is the kind of thing where our organization allows for diverse tactics in order to further our general goal of keeping people safe, but also broadening a leftist movement. Yeah. Actually meeting people, right? Because
you need people to do social stuff.
And so
I know it sucks. I don't like people much.
Yeah, and so we play to our strengths.
Yeah, exactly.
And so in the same, and this is how important I think outreach is, which again is why the ISO I think fell very short, is some of those same people that might have been spitting on you a little bit sooner are talking to me openly, having a huge amount of agreement, and they realized, because I told them that I'm an anarchist, and probably didn't realize that you were an anarchist too.
That's
and
true.
we believe a lot of the same
I
things.
didn't have a conversation with the guy who was trying to
And
kill.
that
who
shows,
was saying he was trying to kill.
and that shows how much social context can actually play out in a role, because these people are primed to believe a certain thing about leftists. And unless you actually meet one and learn, oh, these people aren't fire-breathing demons.
Yeah, I'm not a globalist, with parentheses, fire-breathing demon from the pits of hell, or whatever Alex Jones has to say about me this week.
Right, and so, this again is sort of our different perspective on how to make an organization move. We exemplify our politics by doing things. We're very outward facing. We tell people what we're going to do, and when we feel it's necessary, we openly defy the law, demonstrating our ability to and willingness to do what is needed to be done regardless of what the law says, because as a generally anarchist organization, that's what we're going to do. We're going to do the thing that we believe needs to be done.
Yeah, I don't have any kind of professional licensure at the moment. All of my work and the work of my team, some of us do, some of us don't, but our street medic team is all volunteers, because that's been the tradition of the street medic movement going back to the 70s. I might even do an episode on the history of that at some point later on. But at no point in our 6-year-ish in operation at this point have I or anyone in my team ever had to have a conversation planning for an action or of any kind where we're asking for permission to anyone. We usually have questions like, when is it, where is it, how many people are going to be there, what level of threat are we anticipating, and who can actually physically be there. So we work things out internally, democratically as a team, and we can reach out to other contacts in the community for backup. But we don't have like a strict, it's extremely foolish to me as someone who's moved in a more non-hierarchical direction politically, to have strict hierarchy among two guys in the back room of a bar. Yeah. That seems extremely strange. Hierarchy at a certain scale doesn't work.
No, it certainly doesn't, and it sometimes can be a serious obstacle to getting things done, and that was a huge problem that we felt with the ISO. We are, we don't always go in the exact same direction in what we do as part of our organization, but we all have similar goals in mind, and that's what's made a big strength for us. So like Doc would have very minimal interest in doing the amount of outreach that I do, but it all plays in a similar direction. And imagine if we were in a situation where we either chose A, to be only outreach, or B, only doing stuff or only doing anti-fascist work. That would severely limit our ability to get things done, and it would limit the amount of people that want to actually join in with the work. We have availabilities for pretty much every kind of person at every kind of level. Folks that just want to get donations, folks that want to do street medics, folks that want to do outreach, folks that want to do planting and community gardening. We try to diversify because our needs are so diverse as a society, and there is room for everyone at every skill level to push forward a better world.
Yeah, absolutely. I remember 2 years ago during the George Floyd uprising, I was in a very strange position of having to tell an ED, an emergency department physician, what to do for a while, because she was training as a street medic, and so she had trained a little bit out of state, and she didn't have anybody in Connecticut to train her. So I ended up finishing that up, and we went to a couple of demonstrations together. And past a certain point, it's not a formal process. It's more of an old-timey apprenticeship situation. But I was like, you know what you're doing. You know how this works. Knighting motions. You are a street medic now. Congratulations. And then, as you may recall, shortly after the George Floyd uprisings, we were back in the depths of the pandemic. So I haven't heard much from her because of a global pandemic that's killed millions of Americans. But yeah, my team and I have been busy doing all kinds of different work and all kinds of non-medical work as well for 6-7 years now. So.
And, one of the important things about street medicine is, people talk about the oldest profession in the world being sex work, and maybe that's true, but a close second, if not first, is healers, just out in the community doing healing.
Yeah, you don't really need to, it helps to have germ theory. That was a very helpful breakthrough. But there have been times in world history where different parts of the world had different understandings of what caused disease. If you were around in 1522, 500 years ago exactly, and you had to go to a hospital, you would have been much better off going to a Chinese hospital than one in, London. Because in Europe at the time, not only did germ theory not exist, miasma theory, which is the idea that disease is caused by ill gases, like bad gases, didn't really exist either, so they had no idea. You were just been considered some sort of horrible sinner. Whereas the Chinese, in Chinese medicine, which is a system that still exists, they had the understanding of, quote, invisible toxins in the air that caused infectious diseases, because they had observed epidemics since always and took the liberty of writing them down.
Yeah, maybe that's what happens when your society doesn't collapse into the Dark Ages for 1,000 years.
That does tend to help,
Yeah,
yeah.
maybe
Which
that's-
this might be going on right now.
Yeah, I mean,
I have a Kindle full of medical textbooks, though, so at least anybody in my community that I train is not going to have to reinvent the wheel in that regard.
yeah, I mean, at least you can plug it into the outlet in your house, right?
No, but there's
No?
plenty of outlets all over the place.
For now.
And I have a solar. I have the solar charger if it gets that bad.
Yeah, that's true. But yeah, I mean, so street medicine is sort of a modern manifestation of one of the oldest professions ever, and it's just as relevant. And as our institutions consistently crumble, it's going to be really important. And so if this is something that is of interest to you, I really encourage you to look into street medicine, because it's going to become more and more important.
Yeah, so in case you're looking it up and you come across like the Street Medicine Institute, which is a professional organization that does like medical school students doing work with homeless folks, that's not explicitly what I'm talking about. Other terms are action medical, or, and I do hate this last term, riot medicine, because you don't need to be at a riot to serve as a street medic. There's plenty of non-riot opportunities to do that particular practice and role. But you can find street medic collectives in basically every state in the United States and plenty of places abroad.
Yeah, and this, especially from an anarchist perspective, is sort of a manifestation of our desire to create a replacement. You know, people have this understanding that anarchism is only about ripping things down, only about setting things on fire. And while it's certainly partly that, it's also about replacing it with something else. And, you know, some people refer to this concept as dual power, where you build a parallel society to the one that you're trying to rip down, because you're trying to demonstrate the viability of an alternate way of organizing things. And taking care of people is a huge part of that. And so, you know, Doc and their team is out there doing this kind of stuff in the same way we're out there doing these giveaways once a month, and in the same way that we're putting out this orchard trying to undermine the idea of commodified food, because hidden secret, plants just make food if you give them space to do it.
Yeah, and I'm not much of an expert gardener. I chopped onions in half and buried them, expecting them to sprout a year or two ago, which one of my partners has not ceased to mock me for, deservingly so. But I've sort of had a trial and error killing plants until I don't approach to the situation.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly made fun of Doc as well for this, because he said, you know, I just divided up all the onions and planted them. I said, so you've killed them? He said, oh, I guess so, damn. And, you know,
Everything is either potatoes or not potatoes to me.
There were certainly some Irish jokes in there. And yeah, so not everything is potatoes, and onions happen to be one of those things that are not potatoes.
Oh, that sucks.
Yeah.
Well, I do have a bag of potatoes. I can go plant that. And if I can't even get those to sprout, I'm just going to give up. I'm done.
Yeah, I mean, if you... you got to figure out your gardening. But yeah, no, so we're getting better with that stuff all the time. And the trees are there.
They're alive, and the only reason they're alive is because they're already planted. I just have to water them, and I mulch occasionally.
Yep.
Or like, not even mulch, just like prune and keep the mugwort from drowning them. Absolutely. That I can figure out.
Absolutely.
It's growing my own plants from the start. That's a trial and error situation.
Yeah. And so we do that sort of stuff, and we do it publicly in order to encourage other people to take on those actions. And if we are out there doing these things, and most critically, getting away with it, that allows for other people to feel comfortable to push the boundaries of resistance as well. And so more and more people might experiment with building alternatives to the ones that we have now, and maybe we might just not nosedive into extinction because we actually have other alternatives.
Yeah. I think we're 0 for 3 or 3-0 against the city at this point. 3 different times we hold, as we've explained, we hold our free store downtown last Saturday of every month. Never seek a permit, haven't in 6 years, not going to start now. 3 separate times the city government, their event coordinator, the mayor's top goon, various police officials have tried to shut down the free store explicitly, and every single time they get run off by just public outcry.
Yeah,
because we have support in the community because we do shit.
Because we do shit in the community, and that's the kind of situation where you break down the separation that our society currently fosters. We're not just a bunch of faceless nobodies. We're not a bunch of scary Antifa people that no one knows. We're a bunch of friendly Antifa people that everyone knows. Mostly friendly.
Yeah.
And so that allows people to get a real understanding of what we're about. One of the things that I always say on my radio appearances and one of my recent TV appearances as well is I want people to find out what an anarchist is from me, an anarchist, not Sean Hannity.
Yeah. Can I just say, as part of the Irish diaspora and somebody sort of involved in Irish Republican organizing, don't listen to Sean Hannity and Bill O'Reilly about socialism. Listen to James Connolly and Seamus Costello and Irish Republicans who are socialists, not American Republicans who happen to be of Irish extraction.
Yeah, Republican is one of those words that means different things in different places.
Yeah, technically speaking, Vietnam and France are both republics, but they are not the same country. Believe it or not, Vietnam used to be occupied by France, and they very, very loudly asserted that they were not French until the French agreed.
So you mean French Indochina?
French Indochina.
When it stopped being French Indochina?
Yes. Indochina, which was neither Indian nor Chinese.
So let's call it Indochina.
Right.
Perfect colonizer logic.
And they also lumped Cambodia and Laos in there, which neither of those places were very fond of.
And so good old Uncle Ho, I heard with 4 or 5 guys and a couple of pistols, is okay, we're going to kick out the French.
And then they did.
And
Ho Chi Minh, I'd like to point out as somebody who worked in restaurants for a while, Ho Chi Minh worked every job from dishwasher to line cook before he led the revolution in Vietnam.
And, how did he get popular support? Did he, do things in the community?
Yeah, he would have, grow food. He, especially the NLF. I actually have one. It's at my dad's house, but the National Liberation Front, which was rather fond of blues, and its enemies called the Viet Cong, used to have medic teams that would go to communities and patch up people in middle of nowhere villages in South Vietnam when the government would come and say, hey, we know the Viet Cong's here. We understand they set a cast on your child's leg. Guess we have to burn your house down.
Yeah, and it's almost like that might generate popular support for the people that are helping the community versus firebombing them or spraying them with defoliants.
Yeah, that if you're spraying defoliants and burning thatch houses to the ground, that's not a great way to do counterinsurgency. Fun fact, and I've mostly spent a good part of time since the end of the George Floyd uprising reading military history. There's not really a good way to do counterinsurgency. There's not really ever been a successful counterinsurgency except in one very unique case.
Yeah.
But generally, if you're in an insurgency situation, you're going to want to side with the insurgency. Odds are they're going to win. You have less... You just need to survive, and you need to build popular accord by doing shit. Which is not to say that what we're doing is in furtherance of those goals. I'm simply stating a historical fact.
Well, one of the things that American counterinsurgency documents say is to beware of so-called mutual aid groups because they are building the infrastructure for people to have the ability to resist. And I was trained to believe that keeping the ability to resist was a fundamentally American value, but I guess I was lied to.
Yeah, one of the reasons that I and my fellow street medics, not just in this team, but all over the world, are so consistently subject to death threats and violence by system-loyal fascists and state police is because the police understand that having medics at a protest makes that protest more viable. And so if you happen to wear a Red Cross and wear a Steph and grab a med kit and go to a protest, you will get tear gassed because police tend to interpret a Red Cross on your clothing as a target sign.
Yeah.
So it's happened to me here specifically.
Yeah.
I was detained by a police officer one time who, he asked me who I was. I refused to tell him my name. He asked me what I was doing there. I said, I am a street medic and I am on duty at this rally. And I asked why I was being detained, and he told me he wanted permission to search through my bag of extra medical gear, which I refused. And then he says to me something to the effect of, well, he needs to search through my bag because I have a big bag at a protest. It could mean anything. I said, well, there are red crosses on that bag. Surely you must know what a red cross means. To which the police officer says, well, who knows what a red cross might mean? To which I replied, well, I'm just going to call my lawyer now because I know what he's there for at least. And then the police officer let me go.
Yeah. And
I got back to work.
Absolutely. And that's if you want to have an idea of what sort of counterinsurgency tactics that mutual aid groups are subjected to, a buddy of mine, I feel somewhat comfortable saying that now, Margaret Killjoy, has the Cool People Who Did Cool Stuff podcast, and she talks about Food Not Bombs in a two-parter, which is an organization not all that dissimilar from ours that does similar stuff, but they do more meal distribution. We distribute kind of supplies and food, but not necessarily cooked meals.
Yeah,
so
we did that once.
Related organizations, but a little bit different. And my God, the types of things they've been subjected to are out of this world. So
yeah, their membership in San Francisco. So I was listening to that episode too, obviously, and at one point, they were just consistently, every time they ran a free store in San Francisco, half their attendees would be in the city jail by nightfall, and then they would just get out and go back and do it again, and get arrested and go out and do it again, and get out and get arrested and do it again. So eventually they just kept clogging up the system, and they got to the point where the United Nations investigated the San Francisco city government for keeping political prisoners.
Yeah, I can't remember the exact term that Margaret used, but yeah, there's a certain designation that you get where once you have it, they're allowed, I think it was Amnesty International, is allowed to actually go after you. And that's the power of persistence, and that's really important, so Margaret tells a story, and it's in the podcast, so I guess it's shareable, where I guess Margaret was deemed like the most arrestable person, and so Margaret's job was to cut the ropes holding the picnic tables on top of the van when driving through a protest, because they were going to set up a Food Not Bombs within the perimeter, the secured perimeter. And like that's the kind of stuff you have to do just to serve food to people. And boy,
I would go so far as to posit that a political system that actively refuses to feed and house people, and relatedly has people going hungry and sleeping in the street, is not a system worthy of your consideration or loyalty, because it's not a two-way loyalty. It's just not.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things that I talked about on a call into Lee's show recently was talking about how your loyalism to capitalism won't protect you.
Yeah,
and
your landlord. I tell people this all the time because I'm very actively agitating for local tenants unions. I'm not organizing them myself. I'm an agitator. That's my role. I get loud and I yell until people are like, "Hey, that's a great idea. We should do that." I tell people all the time, if you're opposed to tenants unions, your landlord's not going to cut your rent. It's not going to happen. I've never met a single person who's like, well, I licked my landlord's boots, and now I only pay $400 a month for a 2-bedroom apartment. Never fucking happens.
I'll tell you what, I'm in a landlords only venting group on Facebook, and one of the things they talked about is, have any of you ever gotten tips from your tenants? Like, I feel like it never happens, but it'd be really nice, just every once in a while, like, here's an extra $100 on the rent. And they're complaining about how that never happens. Do you have some thoughts on that?
I used to work in restaurants where people's only living was making tips, which was basically just a nice way of saying, if the customer feels like you should eat tonight, they'll feed you, and if they don't, they don't. The idea of you making like a free $1,800 plus a month, and that's very low at this point. It's like more like $2,400 a month locally, which is why I live in a cabin. If you are making $2,400 a month every month in free money, and you have the audacity to ask for an extra $100 a month, I might reconsider my stance on Maoism. Mao knew how to do with landlords.
You know what? Mao had some very clear thoughts on landlords.
Yeah, people, I remember reading about these things they used to have in China at the time called struggle sessions, which they always made sound like, oh, there's these big menacing things where people's heads were just chopped off. No, what would actually happen was tenants in a building would figure out who their landlord is, where he lives, because your landlord lives somewhere. I don't know if that's actionable or not, but your landlord has a name and a house.
It's a fact.
Yeah. Your landlord's a person. They have a name and a house, and you can go figure out where it is and go to it if you'd like. So they would. And then they would just surround their landlord and yell at him, and always at him, and force him to give them their land and their houses into neighborhood collectives, which is largely what the countryside of China was at the time. It was a situation where the peasants had already like taken over their rented lands for themselves, and so the state just sort of allowed them to do that. That's really my compromise solution. The state just lets me do whatever I'm doing already.
Yeah, Robert Evans did something on Makhnovia, the Ukrainian anarchist experiment, and it wasn't. Apparently, it wasn't killing all the feudal landlords. It was saying, okay, you get a house just like everyone else.
Yeah,
and
that's it.
That to me is sort of undoing the feudal arrangement. That's one of the more charitable ways you can do it. And people might say, oh, the Makhnovist took my family's castle and all of our horses, and it's like, yeah, well,
I don't feel bad for you for the giant castle.
I don't, because there were a whole bunch of people that you were oppressing in order to pay for that castle, who usually were paying for that castle in the form of taxes or something.
Yeah, it's the same reason why every time I talk to someone sleeping in doorways in this city, which is way more often these days than it used to be, although it's never been non-existent, someone will try to tell me, oh, well, that person made individual choices and that's why they're sleeping in a doorway. Meanwhile, I have to go home to my fucking $300,000 house in suburbia. And I'm like, well, I don't feel bad for you. I'm personally not in favor of really killing anyone if I can avoid it, because I'm a medic. But I understand that a certain degree of force and violence is necessary to assert a change in the social relations. But I'd rather just have, like you said, a situation where the landlord gets to keep his house and you live in an apartment, it's yours. That's how everyone refers to it, but that's not how it actually is.
Yeah.
You don't actually own your car. You don't own your house. You don't own your apartment. The distinction is made when you're evicted and all your shit is thrown out on the sidewalk. What's on the sidewalk is yours. The apartment is not.
Yeah, and so I'm a huge believer in the right to land access, which is part of why we do our housing for homeless folks. It's part of why we do the community orchard project. We have this resentment toward the enclosure of land that has happened pretty much all over the world at this point, because some Enlightenment thinkers thought that everyone had the right to life, liberty, and property, and at some point it got bait and switched to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, which is sort of a meaningless platitude.
Yeah, another Enlightenment thinker who was French, and the French did the Enlightenment way better than the Americans ever did. A man named Jean-Jacques Rousseau once said, "You are at once lost if you forget that the fruits of the earth belong to all and the earth itself to no one."
Didn't Adam Smith say something about landlords, the person that every capitalist loves to cite but not to read?
They insist on the right to sow where they did not reap, blah, blah, blah. Basically, he was calling landlords explicitly parasites and said that they would be bad for capitalism, because that's what Adam Smith was doing. He was trying to lay out a theory for capitalism as it was developing at the time.
Yup. And so
capitalists are not supposed to like landlords.
And we talk about we bring up enclosure. We've talked about it before, and why I'm all sorts of grouchy about it. And this is again where I'll bring up cool people who did cool stuff. Recently did the episodes on the diggers.
Can I just say it was an episode about the levelers, the diggers, and my personal favorite, the ranters.
The ranters, yeah.
The ranters. That's me. I don't dig. That sounds like hard work. Don't really want to level because I don't do construction, but I can rant.
Oh God!
I can rant.
You can rant, but
I can rant like a motherfucker.
Margaret, if you're listening, keep it up.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so definitely something worth looking into, because we have this idea that capitalism was this sort of peaceful expansion, and everyone wanted to go into it, and it was just this natural progression of humanity. And the truth is, it was a war.
Yeah. Explicitly focusing on Ireland for a second. Ireland did not enter into capitalism willingly any more than people in Ireland spoke English willingly. So
yeah, and
the English just developed capitalism and were like, let's force it on the Irish. That's going to go well.
To unite the understandings of of enclosure with our frustration around landlords. I mean, was it Robert Evans who did the Great Hunger couple episodes?
Yeah, I think
Nightmare.
Yeah.
And I didn't realize up until that point how much landlordism was a factor. Like, the tumbling of roofs and stuff, and just letting people die in the fields. And
what would happen is people have this perception that Ireland was only growing potatoes, which is not true. Your family plot would grow everything. and then everything but the potatoes would go to some absentee English landlord. And when a potato blight came, which is the only thing they would let you feed your family, you still had to grow food for an absentee landlord, but now you have no food for you and your family, and your landlord just goes, you could just die, and I'll just fucking raise the rents and sell it to somebody else.
God, that sure sounds like a parasite to me.
Oh, yeah,
but
yeah,
like, you
yeah.
know, we have this idea because we're told it's the potato famine, but the other thing that I didn't realize, I heard it in passing over the years, is y'all were still making potatoes. They just went on a boat to England.
Yeah, there's plenty of non-blighted potatoes. The blight affected the most common variety of crop. Oh, look, here comes the cops. They're angry because I'm explaining Irish history.
Uh-oh.
I hope it's an Irish cop.
That doesn't seem to be.
Too bad.
Anyway.
But yeah, there were plenty of non-blighted potatoes and non-potato foods. You just couldn't eat them or you would be shot. Which personally, if I'm already hungry, because I was hangry this morning, if somebody had said to me, hey, you don't get to eat today or you'll be shot, I might stab you and just steal your food. I don't know. I'm just saying, hypothetically, that might happen.
And this is that difficult dynamic where people might decide, well, we're just going to go do a terrorism now in order to, eat.
Yeah.
And then when you fight an empire, usually empire stuff happens to you, and that's its own difficulty. And yeah, so the Great Hunger, as they call it, was an entirely man-made, some people might say, act of genocide.
Yeah. It's usually referred to in Irish as the Gorta Mór, which literally translates to the Great Dying. Or the Great Death. Yeah. I mean, and having heard again in this, was it in Behind the Bastards on Robert Evans? Yeah, I believe so.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
I'll maybe link it in the show notes. I just keep plugging Cool Zone Media here because I can't get enough of their stuff. Anyway, I mean that was horrifying to listen to, and I tell people about this because it illustrates how extreme things can get if you let landlordism go to its ultimate conclusion, where all land is eventually owned by some lord somewhere. And we have a similar situation happening now where big banks are buying up all the land. BlackRock owns some huge amount of residential. You're pursing your hands. You have something to say.
Yes. If we're in a situation that's repeating the potato famine in the United States, I can only recommend as a solution that you meet with your friends in the dead of night, and you can just insert beeping noises after this.
Uh-huh.
Sharpen p***s and firearms, figure out where the Lord lives, and just
Yeah.
hypothetically.
Yeah.
That's not an actionable statement. It's not meant to be. It's all hypothetical.
Well, it's a historical commentary about how people have resolved that issue before.
It worked in Ireland, partially.
Yeah.
It's usually at the negotiating table that the struggle for Irish liberation gets hashed out and sold out. But in the streets of Ireland to make the British go away. Super effective. It's worked pretty good.
Yeah. What a horrible world we live in.
Oh yeah, it's look at this landscape in front of us. This is all 19th century brick after the British burned the city to the ground the first time.
Yeah.
And a good fire every now and then tends to just clear the ecosystem right up. So I'm just saying, for whatever that's worth.
Oh man. Yeah. Wild.
Yeah.
But it's how do we, as a leftist organization, try to put forward any sort of change so we avoid this horrible new future great dying without facing the public and saying, hey, other ways of life exist?
Yeah,
How do you do that?
You can't make social change without social involvement. Like, you need to be, and I hate it because I'm not a people person, but even I understand the necessity of talking to people. And it's even better when people talk to me. People come to me and are like, hey Doc, where are we holding the free store this month? There's a Basque cultural festival going on up here. And I'm like, oh, well, just hold it over on this corner over here. And we just did. So, but you need to get to a point where people know you and they talk to you and they feel comfortable sharing their problems with you, so you can hash out ways to solve their problems with them and not have two guys in the back room of a bar. That's not an effective organization.
Yeah.
As the ISO showed by not existing anymore.
Absolutely. And it's a whole lot easier to mistreat someone who you don't see as human because you have no relationship with them.
Yeah, if you don't see them as human because they're behaving more like goblins and just meeting in a small hole somewhere, don't get me wrong, the people dehumanizing you are still dehumanizing you, but you're not really effectively struggling against that effort to dehumanize you either. You're not really struggling against anything. You're reading books about other people's struggles and pretending that you're like part of them somehow.
And so in my latest TV appearance with the former mayor of our city, he was saying how he didn't think of me as an anarchist and said maybe I shouldn't use the term anarchist because he doesn't feel that it fits my politics. And I explained to him, you just don't understand what anarchism is. And as a result, you have this understanding that media has given you about what anarchism is all about. So you feel that this person who you perceive as a reasonable, friendly person who's just trying to help people, it can't fit this scary boogeyman definition. And so how do we challenge and disabuse people of that? How do we make anarchism not a dirty word? It's by talking to normal people. And, I had, in our discussion, which was almost an hour long on local TV with this guy, there were certain issues that I wanted to challenge a little bit more, but in consideration of time, kind of had to package things a little bit. And I grapple with that a little bit of saying, like, well, I would have loved to have addressed these issues. But one of my comrades, a former ISO person, said, people that challenge you to get every single issue out there when talking to, what you might call normies, should go touch grass. Like, you have to start that conversation somewhere.
Yeah.
And we've progressed that conversation quite a bit now. So, like,
yeah, there's objectively more grass to touch than there used to be, thanks to us. So,
how many areas around here would a couple of years ago platform on TV an open anarchist and discuss anarchist ideas and resistance history? How many times would that happen if it weren't for people trying to make that happen? And now other people can get those ideas that aren't taught to them by society and do much better work than I could ever dream of doing.
Yeah, like, to cite a local story, and I'm obviously not naming details here, but there was a person in the community who, multiple times this has happened, where someone will sort of radicalize to the authoritarian right and they'll become like a white nationalist. And so this one person came to the soup kitchen fairly regularly for a while. He does again, but for a while he was coming, and then one day he just started ranting about how he thought Hitler was misunderstood and Stalin was objectively worse, and how actually, if you do your research properly, the Jews actually do run everything. So this is not an effective way to do anti-fascism except for very limited circumstances, like having a friendly crowd around you, for example. So I decided to see if I could law and order him to get him to be openly, loudly anti-Semitic. It only took me about 5 minutes before he was wagging a finger in my face in front of a crowd of my neighbors. And then he just mysteriously left town for a year and a half for reasons I don't know. Never asked at the time. He just stopped showing up one day.
Was this the same time where he screamed at you in front of a crowd of people, "It's the Jews, man"?
It's the Jews, man, is what he actually said. I needed to do my own research because, quote, it's the Jews, man. And then he just left, and now he's back in town, but he's much quieter and avoids me as much as possible.
And what happened as a result of that is, close to 50 or 60 people now understand what that person is about, and
he's extremely isolated from the community, which might radicalize him more, but that was always going to happen no matter what. If someone's yelling about the Jews, fascism is a disease, right? And it's a disease where the earlier you intervene and you prevent it, the easier it is to treat. Once you get to the point of yelling about how the Jews run all of society and getting in people's faces about it, there's no hope for you. It's a terminal illness at that point.
You know what's worse than one white nationalist?
2,
5, 6,
50,
7,
an entire Charlottesville worth,
or an entire U-Haul truck worth.
Yeah, that's true.
When you encounter a social contagion that can hurt people, maybe isolating that early on makes the issue easier to contain.
Yeah, you have to explicitly identify it first, then you isolate it, and then you contact trace, and you sort of do your best to mitigate the spread of that disease. That's called secondary prevention. When you're doing secondary prevention, you already assume that the thing exists and it's too late to not have it exist. You're just trying to mitigate the harm of it as much as possible.
And so you have a situation now where the community knows what this person's about, and they're not going to fall for his maybe soft core pitching of those white nationalist perspectives, and it's going to make him much harder to pull people into that because he can't hide what he's about.
No, he can't, because every time he tries to play himself off now as a regular conspiracy theorist, and most of his internet presence is regular conspiracy theory boomer bullshit. But every time he talks to someone that I know in the city, I'll just remind the person of the time he got in my face about how he thinks the Jews run the world and explain what a dog whistle is. And then they'll be like, oh, yeah, I understand what's going on. And then they'll just be like, fuck you, bro, leave me alone, you know?
And that's really important. And this is the kind of stuff that only happens when you leave the bar
and you
go talk to people, go into the community.
Yelling at people can count as talking to people sometimes.
Well, especially for you, that's about the best we can hope to get.
Yeah, I mean, angrily yelling at the same thing as other angry yelling people is a legitimate conversation for me. That's how organizing works.
Hey, different people have different approaches, and you have the good sense to know when yelling might actually make a little bit of sense.
Yeah, and I don't do a lot of the media outreach and so on because I don't have the temperament for that. But one of the reasons I like to browse through, I don't like to, that's not the right word, I choose to browse through white nationalist social media and so on, is because I don't have to talk to them. They're boring people. They have the same ideas they've always had, and I don't have to fucking talk to them or pretend to respect them. I just don't have to confront them on the internet, and they'll let me in. By the way, if you're a white nationalist and for some reason you're listening to this podcast, I want you to know, whatever Gab group you're in, whatever Facebook group you're in, whatever Twitter thread you're on, I am there. I'm watching, I'm reading everything. I have the fucking documents, ladies and gentlemen. Like Alex Jones. I actually do, though.
Well, in the interest of you being able to continue that, I think it's best to not mention any of the groups that you or anyone else have infiltrated, lest they purge anyone that is especially quiet.
Too late. Not mentioning the groups. Already in them. Whatever group you're in, I'm in it.
There you go.
Shut the group down. It's the only way to get rid of me.
Shut the group down. Yeah,
I
guess that's possible.
Stop being a Nazi.
And now that we have the Basque Cultural Festival in full musical power, I think probably it's best that we wrap things up so we can actually hear most of what's said. So, is there anything else you'd like to close with in our discussion of why we broke up with why we were broke up with from the ISO?
I'm sorry to my political ex. I hope he's doing well, but I'm pretty sure, politically speaking, he's not. I like reading books too. Reading books can't be the entirety of your political trajectory. Go touch grass. Go talk to people. Go do shit. I don't know. Go do shit.
In the words of Fred Hampton, who history actually remembers, theory's fine, but without practice, it ain't shit.
It ain't shit.
Have a great day, everybody.
'Cause there's nothing I want more than to sleep under the night sky. The animals as they go about their lives. Feel the fire warm my body, feel the mud under my toes. But tonight this hell keeps me enclosed. For if we don't have our freedom, if we are captured by their iron hands, then the vision for fire, it burns so much more bright. There's no justice in the system, a bigger cage is still a prison. Well, I hope that somewhere someone breaks free tonight.